What is up, you guys? Hopefully, you're having a great day. So, today we're continuing on with our photographic portfolio development. So, the last couple of videos, we've been focusing mainly on photography and organizing our photos, sequencing our photos, and stuff like that, which is all very important. But we need to transition to the right and talk about the second part of putting together a well rounded portfolio. And this is, something that most photographers never really think about until it's too late, right? You spend months, maybe years, right, building your body of work that agonized over every single shot. You've edited it down, ruthlessly, you sequenced it perfectly, and then something, looks at your profile, your portfolio, and they're like, so what about it? And you freeze, right? And because, here's the thing that nobody, tells you when you're first picking up a camera. And your photography is only half of the portfolio. The other half is your wording, right? This is very important because the written statement that stands alongside of your images and tells, the story of, why you shot it, why it matters, and why you're the one who made it is very, very important. And most photographers, beginners and well pros alike, right, either skip this part entirely or they write something so vague and jargon filled that it actually makes the work harder to understand. So today we're going to fix that, and I'm going to break down exactly what it is you need to write and how you. And I'm also going to show you some real world examples from photographers who are doing high level work, whether you're a commercial photographer, documentary photographer, or fine art photographer, right? And for these specific type of written statements, each of you will have, we'll see how we cover all three, right? Because each one is going to be completely different on how you present it and what it is that you're saying. So let's get into it. So, if your commercial photography is your lane, right, advertising, editorial, product, lifestyle, then when the written piece of your portfolio that you need is called a visual brand statement. So, essentially, a visual brand statement is going to be it's a short written piece that strategically promotes who you are and what you stand for, and specifically your photography strengths. And the key word there is strategically. This isn't poetry and this isn't your diary. This is marketing. But marketing sounds like what? A human being wrote it. So let me show you what I mean. So here we're looking at commercial photographer James Stalling. And, he uses the statement on his website, which we're currently on. So his is going to be um, about right here. So here's his artist statement, right? I'm at a dynamic and vibrant point in my photography career. A nexus formed from the cumulative and varied experience of the past few decades, right? So he's talking about 25 years of experience. He uses words like collaboration and friendly, effective teamwork, right? And he's picking these words very specifically, right? He says all approaches all subjects with equally and respectfully and with equal empathy. Now, this is very important. Reading between the lines, every one of those word choices that he is talking about and doing is very, very deliberate, okay? And, there's nothing wrong with that, but, art directors who are considering hiring him are going to be reading his statement and thinking, this person is already experienced easy to work with, and won't make my job harder. And that's the key thing. That's the sell. I don't feel like a sales pitch, but it's, I know it doesn't feel like a sales pitch, but it absolutely is one. You are pitching yourself, you are the brand, right? Um, Here's another example from San Francisco. Laura Funkel, right? She writes that her work occupies a place somewhere between, cheerful consideration and playful happiness. And then at the very end, she splits in the fact that she used to be an art director. So because she used to be an art director, she kind of has an upper leg compared to all of us, because if you're an art director, you already know what they're looking for. You already know what they need and stuff like that. So because you already have that insider information, now you just go out, pick up a camera and start shooting it, and boom, you're set up for success, right? Now, the last detail, it whispers to every art director reading her portfolio that I understand your world, I used to sit in your seat, and you can trust me, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But ultimately, a level of intentionality that I want you to bring to your brand statement. Here's an exercise that I think I want you to try and do. Sit down and imagine you are an art director looking at your portfolio from that perspective. Are you looking at someone who just graduated from school or someone trying to break into a new market? What worlds would make you feel confident hiring that person? What qualities does that actually make value, right? And, write these down and then build around them, right? And if you have anything in the background that brings your world in your client's world and a related degree, industry experience, or even a unique technical skill, don't leave it out. That bridge is gold. You're bridging that gap. So that was commercial photography. If documentary photography is your world, your portfolio needs something completely different. Not a brand statement or an introduction, but a piece of writing that gives your viewers the context they need to fully understand what they're looking at and why it matters, right? And there's specifically three parts that every best, documentary photographer follows. One, context. What is the statement? Why are we here? And what is happening in the world? Two, relevance. Why should the viewer care and what's at stake? And then three, personal stake. Why are you the one telling the story and what's your connection to it, right? So those three things are very, very, very important. So let's look at George here, right? Uh, Going through his website, I really can't find his artist statement. I found it the other day, but I don't know where it's actually at, which is fine. I'll find it later. But he was selected by the Museum of Modern Art in New York for their 2011 new photography exhibit. Let's see if we can even. I wonder if that's even in here. So, he was in the modern art in New York for their 2011 new photography exhibit, and he's the only documentary photographer so honored that year. His project, Fault Lanes in Turkey, in the east and the west, opens with roughly 300 words that do all three things very perfectly. Right, so Turkey east west, and this is his body of work that he is talking about. But being that we're on his website, I imagine his stuff isn't in here. Yeah, I'm not seeing any writing or depiction. But anyhow, he established that context relatively immediately, that Turkey has a national caught between, you know, uh, modern tier and tradition, and between scholasticism and religion, between documentary and representation. He explains relevance. These conditions are reshaping the country line, in real time, with cities become carbon copies of each other at a straggling piece, and he names his personal stakes that he lived in Turkey for 4.5 years and watched these changes happen around him. And by the time you get to the photographs, you're not just looking at images, you're inside the story. You understand what he is trying to convey. Now, the second example that we're going to talk about is Danny Wilcox. So, him and his project, Lost Nation American Ruins, right? Let's see. Assignments. Here we go. So, in his Lost Nations, right? This is his portfolio. We're looking at, rural America and how it's lost over 20 million people since 2000, dropping to just 16% in the national population. And he explains relevance and that the traditions and communities of rural America are disappearing, possibly forever. Right, here we go. Here's a little bit. So, since 2008, I have photographed the impact of depopulation on rural communities across the Midwest and the Plains. Lost Nation documents the slow decay that has turned many small towns into rural ghettos. And, he talks about it starting, the national rural community in the United States have lost more than 12 million people since 2000. The most recent synapse puts it in a sharp share of the nation's population at just the 16%, the lowest in record history, and down 72% a century ago. That's crazy, right? But the tradition and the communities of rural America are disappearing. And that's his whole body of work. And his personal stake, he's from Iowa, so he's born in the US and he's watching this happen. He grew up watching small towns go quiet. And I did too, back in Cedar Ridge, my hometown in Colorado, right? I've been watching it slowly shrink and shrink and shrink. And this is home, and he's photographing it. Now, notice with both of these introductions, they have a common, neither one is flowery or self indulgent. Both are clear, direct, and grounded in a specific fact between uh, personal truth that they've made, and they want you to see these photographs because you already care, right? You're already interested and you care about the story. And so 300 words, three jobs, context and relevance and personal stakes, right? All of that is going to be your blueprint, um, especially as you're creating your artist statement. Okay. And now let's look at some fine art photographers, right? All right, now let's transition to fine art. Okay, fine art photography, which honestly, even if that's not your primary identity, this section is going to change how you think about your written work. The artist statement is a short documentary that provides context for your complete work by summarizing it, the theme, the process, and the significance. And these, are not just one circle distinct, I need to make up right now, right in front. An artist statement is not an explanation, it is a clue, right? That's a key factor. It is your clue. Okay. Your job is not to decode every symbol, every spell, every meaning, right? Your job is to point the viewer in the right direction so that way their own experience, with the work, they can have their own experience with the work, right? Think of it as the difference between a tour guide who reads you every, you know, place card at the museum versus the one who walks you to the painting and says, you know, something quietly brilliant and then steps back and lets you look, right? And so we're going to look at, right here, we're looking at John Paul. He's a digital montage artist, and let's see. Yeah, I'll have to find his artwork, or not his artist statement. I thought it was there, but anyhow, he describes an artist statement as making a visual verbal, right? He puts it very brilliantly. If you don't write about your own work, someone else will, and they will define what it means without you. And remember when we were talking about, right, the intent of your portfolio? That's probably going to be under an open intent because you don't have a strong, cohesive body of work. Writing a statement is how you put, the authorial stamp on the work. It's where you officially claim what you're trying to accomplish within his work. And I mean, his work is very beautiful, especially with like the droplets and stuff like that. He's done quite a bit. Moving along, um, George Collenberg, right? He is another different type of artist, specifically within the uh, fine art world, right? And he says even more directly that if you can't talk or write about your own work, then what are you going to do about your own photography? He argues it's, signals that you might not fully know what it is about, and that opens the door for anyone to twist and bend its meaning to fit their own agenda. So, what does a great artist statement actually cover and look like specifically for fine art, right? So, what does a great artist statement actually cover? Well, it's going to cover three things: what, how, and why, right? What is the work about? Why are you the one who's making it? And how is it constructed in a way that is meaningful, right? So, photographer, for example, Michael Abels makes photographs that combine generic objects with, wine bottles and water pitchers, posted planes with fabric stitches, covered pixel glasses, panels, and so forth, right? It sounds strange, but without context, you might not know what he's trying to make out of it. And her statement cuts right through that confusion. She says that exploring the demeaning effects of contemporary media, specifically the way media turns people into objects, her models are treated in the photography world the same way, props are treated. Even the title of her images are, you know, uh, intervines, right? They're intertwined. There's no distinction between the human body and an imagination or an intimate object, right? Once you know that, photography becomes completely different. Um, it becomes, uncomfortable in an intentional way that provokes interest of confusing. And that's a well written statement, and that's what it does. It unlocks the world. Now, not every statement needs to be academic. Photographer Genos Choi wrote a statement for her project, Miji, that reads almost like a poem: quiet, impressionable, reflective, but it works perfectly because the photographs themselves have that same quality, right? Your photographs and your artist statement tie in together. And here's the rule of thumb. The writing shouldn't the writing should match the project, right? If your writing doesn't match the project, then you're setting yourself up for failure. If your work is quiet and you know, uh, contemplative, your statement can be too. If your work is, analytic and concept driven, your statement should reflect that. The tone of the words and the tones of the image should feel like they came from the same person because they did. On length, most photographers write, one or two versions of their artist statement. They're going to write a short version, a 50 to 100 word for gallery walls, and a quick read. So those are the three versions you're going to write. And a long version on, 100 to 500 words for catalogs, press kits, and even your website bio. Both versions should cover the same core idea, just in different depth. And on a final note on language, write in plain language. Don't use complex, massive words, right? Your parents and your kid's brother should be able to read your artist statement and understand it, sound educated, but not pretentious, not snooty, not like you're trying to impress someone with vocabulary you found in a textbook or because you decided to use AI and half ass it, right? The goal is clarity, not complexity. Okay, so we covered different type of photographer statements. We covered three different type of photographers and genres, but there are a handful of principles that apply across all of them, and I want to make these, land before we wrap this up. Okay, so rule one: include what, how, and why at a bare minimum. Whatever type of statement you're writing, these three anchors keep you and your statement grounded. What is the work? How is it made? If that is relevant to the concept, and why does it exist? Okay. Rule two is proofread. The proofread again. Then have someone else proofread it. And then have someone else proofread it again as well, right? A typo in your artist statement tells galleries and art directors something you don't want them to think. Details matters, right? And that's what you're saying. Details don't matter when you have little typos. Now, if you're going to use AI, what I would recommend doing is fully write out your artist statement and then put it through an AI to fix the spelling and the grammar and stuff like that, but make sure it's still human, right? But that is your professional face, right? Rule three: don't over explain. The statement is a tip off on how to approach the work, not a guideline tour through every decision you made. Leave room for the viewers to bring something from themselves to experience and to be able to express, right? Because artwork is, you know, expressive. Um, Rule four: if your work is especially abstract or difficult to decode, put the statement before the images, right? You can, with artist statements, you can put them at the beginning of the book or the end of the book when you're building your portfolio. And depending on what subject you fall under, maybe it's better to have it at the beginning of the book to provide context for the photos, for example, like documentary and commercial versus landscape, where you could kind of let them go through it, and then at the end your artist statement, so they see the photos for themselves, right? And then rule 5, write it even if it's uncomfortable. Many photographers are resisting writing about their work because they feel like the image should speak for themselves. And yes, a great image does speak, but they speak even more powerfully when the viewer knows where to listen, right? So let's land on this, right? Commercial photography, documentary photography, fine art photography, it does not matter which lane you are in. Your photography portfolio is not complete without words, and these words are not decoration. They are strategically, they are a strategy, they are context. They're just, your um, authorial voice, right? It's your real voice in a world full of images competing for the same limited attention. Visual brand statements tell the market who you are and why they should hire you. A documentary introduction gives your viewers the context and the care about your story before they ever see a single frame. And artist statements hands the viewers the keys and trusts them to open the door themselves. None of this is easy, okay? Write about your own work as if it's one of the most vulnerable things ever creative, right? A person can do that, but here's where I want you to hold. This is what I want you to hold on to, okay? The photographs, the photographers who take the time to articulate their vision are the ones whose vision gets understood. And the ones whose visions get understood are the ones who build a career. So don't skip this part. Sit down, write, write the what, write the why, and write the how. Read it out loud. Cut what doesn't need to be there, and let your words do what your images can't do alone. Your portfolio is almost complete. We are getting there. So go and finish it, and I'll see you in the next one. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. Please subscribe, and have a lovely day.
You and I, we never show emotions, we just